I'm glad that we're having this conversation because there is it seems like there's two worlds when we're studying extremism. There's the world of feelings and the feeling like something is happening or that people want to get involved, or the feeling that the sky is falling, and then there's the world of research and data. And it feels like often we're trying to figure out which one we should pay more attention to. And so one of the things I was kind of interested in having a conversation is that, there's a sense that something is happening in this country, and there's a sense that there's a shift towards the extremist ends of the political spectrum. But how can we use data to figure out what what the reality is, and does that need to jive with the feelings that we have about what's going on? There's that old Colbert thing about truth and truthiness. There's the truth, and then there's what feels right. And I'm just wondering, when you're kind of figuring out what to look at, the data that you want to look at, how do we best approximate finding the reality of what seems in our bones to be real when we're looking for indicators or metrics or measures?
Well, one of the things that I think first drew me into looking at the issue of violence in general, as a data scientist, was you see these very polar narratives in mainstream media and on social media that about what the causes are. And one side blames such and such as being the cause, and another side blames such and such as being the cause, and there's no middle ground between the two. And as a data scientist, one of the things that I always find very useful is to just, go in with an open mind and take a look at the data and see whether or not the narratives are actually supported by any evidence in the data. And so I've done this for many different kinds of violence, looking at it from a data science perspective, trying to tease out, trying to find sources of data that would support one side or the other. Like if they say it's the guns, well, can I get firearm data and also data, looking at that type of violence? And does indeed it seem to be associated with prevalence of guns, things of that nature. And so oftentimes you have to go into this kind of thing with an open mind, because there may be merits to both sides of the argument. So you should never assume that one side is wrong and the other side is right, because as a data scientist, going in with that assumption can be extraordinarily damaging to the results of your analysis, because you're collecting data that only supports your preconceived notion as to what the causes of certain kinds of violence are. And so when I am doing these kinds of analyses, I am bringing in sources of data from all kinds of different, like very multifaceted data that I'm bringing in about what people are doing, what's going on in their communities, that may be making them more susceptible to violence or have greater exposure to violence, and how these different forms of violence might be interconnected, because one of the things that we know is that different types of violence are actually contagious. So if you, for example, grew up in a house with domestic violence, you are more likely to be arrested for assault later on in life. Basically, these types of violence that we are exposed to predispose us to other forms of violence. And so these dynamics of what are going on in the communities can't be ignored. And so sometimes there's the narratives on one side and the other, but some of the true underlying causes actually aren't even in those narratives. And so you kind of have to bring in all these sources of data and try to tease out what the real explanatory variables are, and try to do your best, because correlation doesn't always equal causation. And so just because you see something might be correlated doesn't mean it's necessarily a cause. And so you have to kind of dig deeper to see whether or not it really does seem to be causal.